Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now today, we have Ben with us again as our guest, and we are talking about choice experiments. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but we are going to be sharing with you some, well, let's put it this way. Ben was, until recently, an honours student at Griffith University, and his honours was to do with these things called choice experiments and combining that with how we can use them in water-sensitive urban design. And we'll get all into this, but it can tell us some interesting things about people's preferences and perceptions for all things wooded. So we're going to be talking about that today. So to get into it, I suppose let's just preface this that in a minute we are going to explain what a choice experiment is, but first up we're going to tell you why we are interested in choice experiments. So we both have our own pet little preferences here. So we're both going to tell you about why we're interested in it, and then Ben will tell you a little bit more about choice experiments and how they work. So for the first part of this video, what I'd say to you is just think of a choice experiment as a well-designed and well-thought-out survey that you would administer to a bunch of different people and then do some maths on to elicit some data from. If you think about it like that for the time being until we get into some more detail, it'll serve you well. So, Ben, do you want to go with first about, I suppose, why you are interested in these things called choice experiments?
Sure. Well, as Jack said, I am a former honours student from Griffith University, and I had the pleasure of doing internships with Healthy Waterways, through which I met Jack, my honours project was with Healthy Waterways, and it was specifically focused on bioretention systems and working out what people liked about bioretention systems or rain gardens at the streetscape scale.
Streetscape.
So that kind of gave me an interest in bioretention and vegetated stormwater infrastructure or green infrastructure or whatever you want to call it. And that sort of took me down a path of that kind of work, of pursuing that kind of work. And through that, I met Renew Solutions, also through Jack. And that launched me into a career, I suppose, in asset management. And one thing that I've noticed about asset management is that for stormwater infrastructure in particular, so your structural and your green or vegetated or wooded stormwater infrastructure, management is plagued by maintenance. Maintenance seems to be a recurring issue in this space, and in particular, the implementation of maintenance. And that's mostly related to things like limited financial resources on part of councils who are struggling to cope with the maintenance of these assets, or this infrastructure. I'll call them assets.
Sure.
And what that made me think was that, there is this maintenance issue, there isn't enough funds available to meet the maintenance demands and to make sure that these devices, these assets, are meeting or achieving their intended environmental and aesthetic or amenity outcomes. We may need to look at alternative ways of funding maintenance and management to achieve those outcomes, which led me to the choice experiment, which is a technique that you can use to essentially elicit what people prefer for and how much they would be willing to pay for improvements in management, specifically maintenance, to achieve those outcomes.
Okay, so you're saying that you could use a choice experiment, which again, as we said, is essentially a well thought out survey that you do some stats on.
Yep.
You have a bunch of people do your survey, do your choice experiment.
Members of the general public.
Members of the general public.
Yep.
And then you could then have some statistically and scientifically accurate and relevant data of what people actually think about these types of assets that you could then use in making a case for appropriate funding and appropriate budgets.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Obviously, anyone who's watched my videos will know that speaks to my heart and my interest here, so I'm on board with that. As well as obviously, being on board with Ben's interest there, I've got another angle that I'm interested in here, and this was something that my interest here has built for a while, but the ability for choice experiments to help in this space became abundantly clear, almost like the switching on of a light bulb. Ben and I were sitting around at Griffith Uni one day talking about this, and suddenly it was like, oh wow, just the penny dropped. And I was like, oh, that fills a gap that I've never understood before.
I remember that moment.
Yeah. So let's preface this by saying, okay, at the moment in Australia, we are trying to drive water-sensitive urban design through, well, we had the vision of water-sensitive urban design, which is this big vision. So it's, you know, the stormwater management that we're most familiar with, but then it's also, these things should be aesthetically pleasing, they should deliver cooling, all these things that are now kind of branded under the water-sensitive cities concept. They should be, you know, nice to spend time around, they should provide habitat for wildlife, all these broader visions of water-sensitive urban design. But so far in Australia, we have broadly tried to drive it in new development through setting stormwater objectives. So you have this broad vision that encompasses, say, you know, 5, 6, 7 different things, one of which is stormwater. And we've tried to drive that entire broad vision by setting objectives about stormwater. So saying you need to reduce the amount of pollution in your stormwater by X. And then we've been setting guidance that says, oh, and by the way, we'd like you to build your bioretention systems nice and make them pretty and, you know, keep them looking good, and so on. And unsurprisingly, we keep getting systems that fundamentally just speak to the stormwater objective. And to me, that makes total sense. It's like a game. It's like basketball, right? There's a set of rules in basketball, and therefore, people in responding to those rules do exactly what they need to maximize their return within the rules that they're given. So in basketball, you can score 3 points if you throw the ball in from a fair way away from the hoop. You score 2 if you throw it in from closer to the basket, and then there's a line that distinguishes between the two. So of course, there's a disincentive to shoot from just inside that line because it's quite a hard shot, but you still only get 2 points. Or you could step out a tiny bit further, and the shot's not much harder, but you get 3 points, or you can step in closer, and yeah, so there's incentives there. And it occurred to me that the same thing happens with our stormwater objectives. The system that we have derived sets up a series of incentives, and the fact that the objectives that we're trying to deliver water-sensitive urban design by only really speak to stormwater, it's not surprising that we only get stormwater outcomes. So for a while, I've been like, okay, how do we get a broader set of objectives? And people like Healthy Waterways have done a really good job in trying to tackle that with systems like Living Waterways, which is a scoring tool that sets up scores for all these broader objectives that we're interested in. And that's great, because that answers that part for me. But a problem that's still there with Living Waterways is when you think about the physical realm, when you think about the stormwater objectives, they are built on hard scientific data. So in order to have the stormwater objectives, we need a model with which to assess compliance of those objectives, and that's the MUSIC model, the model for urban stormwater improvement conceptualization. But in order to have MUSIC, we need to have hard fundamental data on how the world actually works. That's data on rainfall and runoff patterns. So that's literally climatic data. Then that's hydrological data about, you know, the water hits the ground, where does it go, how does it flow, your base flow, surface flow, all this hydrology stuff. We need fundamental data on that. Once we've figured out where the water goes once it hits the ground, we then need data on, well, how does the pollution get attached to it? How much pollution is there? What types? And then we need real world data on, well, we've got these treatment systems, how do they function? And so once you have that fundamental underpinning data, you can have the model. And once you have the model, you can set the objectives, which in Queensland are in the state planning policy and in local government planning schemes. And once you have the objectives, you can drive outcomes. The challenge that Living Waterways has, and I'm getting to the point here, I promise. The challenge that Living Waterways has is that it set the objectives, but the objectives have been set qualitatively. They've been set based on the opinions of professionals, which, in light of having no better data on this, is totally fine, and I completely support the fact that that's been done. But I would prefer a world where we set these objectives based on some type of quantifiable data. And this is where the choice experiment comes in, because we can at least theoretically use it to capture real world data on what people think of water sensitive urban design measures, in the same way that you would go out and monitor, say, rainfall patterns to get real world data on climate. You would go out and see how much rain falls. We could use the choice experiment and go out and see what people think of these measures. And with enough data, with enough choice experiments done, you could then build a model. And once you have a model, you can set objectives. And you can theoretically do this and start to populate out more objectives with quantifiable data behind it for all these different broader water sensitive urban design streams. And if my hypothesis is true, which it might not be, but if my hypothesis that the reason that we get really narrow stormwater outcomes is because our objectives are narrow, then that should, by having broader objectives, start to broaden the outcomes that we receive. Maybe. So that's my interest in it, trying to set these broader objectives. Okay, Ben, tell us a little bit more about choice experiments than just they're a fancy survey.
Yes, of course. Well, so a choice experiment is a survey. In technical terms, it's called an economic valuation, a stated preference economic valuation technique.
Okay.
So we go out, it's a survey, we ask people, for example, Jack, in a survey, to state his preferences for changes in the way that, for example, the environment or stormwater infrastructure is managed.
Okay.
So the best way to communicate a choice experiment, in my mind, is by actually doing one.
Okay.
So we'll just run through a mock choice experiment that Jack and I are presenting to the Stormwater 2016 conference in the coming weeks.
That's a really good point. That was actually the reason why we're doing this video, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because
yeah.
I didn't say that in the intro. Whoops. Unless I've edited it back in. If you're listening to this now and you're going, yeah, you said that in the intro, Jack, it's because I've recorded it later and edited it on the front. But we are giving 2 presentations at the Stormwater 2016 conference on the Gold Coast. This video will be coming out on the week of that conference. And we're trying to provide this video to tie our 2 presentations together.
This is right.
Yep.
Yes.
Because we have 2 different interests in this and therefore 2 different presentations.
This is right.
Okay.
So, a choice
Show me
experiment.
a choice experiment.
These are cards, and as I said, I would go out to, say, a relevant community, the community that I want to sample and I want to understand their preferences, and also how much they're willing to pay for the changes in the environment or stormwater management that we are proposing, or that are being proposed either through a local government or what have you.
Yep.
So it would involve me coming up to Jack, who may be a resident of a street in which a water-sensitive urban design element is implemented. It could be a rain garden, it could be pervious pavements, it could be
It could be anything.
anything.
You just have to design the survey appropriately to
This
fit,
is right.
to fit the results that you want to get. In the same way that if you were figuring out water quality in a stream, you
Yes.
designed the sampling method to get the appropriate results.
That's right.
Okay.
So in terms of a bioretention system or a rain garden that's installed in the street, let's just hypothetically say that Jack lives in a street that has a rain garden installed in it. He may feel a particular way about the way in which that element, that device is being managed and specifically maintained. So to go back to my maintenance example of a choice experiment, we'll use that as an example. So what I would do is I would approach Jack and I would ask him if he would be willing to participate in this survey. And I would ask Jack, inside of this survey, 6 to 8 questions involving, in each question, a choice between 2, 3 plus, usually between that, options of stormwater management, and in particular the management of that bioretention system or bioretention systems into the streetscape instance in his street. And what the questions and the options would entail were different outcomes for the features of the bioretention. So we would ask him if he would be willing to pay more, for example, to improve or to get the outcome of improved maintenance, which might be the presence of weeds and litter, or just how it appears generally. By asking him if he's willing to pay more to receive better management in terms of maintenance, there might be a resulting or corresponding increase or improvement in downstream water quality and things like this. So I'm going to present now, or hopefully what will come up in the video right now, is an example of a choice set.
We'll flick this up on the screen.
Yeah, so I would pass this over to Jack and he would make his choice from the 3 options that are included in there.
Okay, so I've got a card here.
Yeah.
There's 3 options. I can see that the last one of them is like the status quo.
That's right.
It's no change.
Which reflects the current conditions inside of Jack's street.
Yep, and then there's 2 options above that that are different from the status quo and
That's
different
right.
from each other.
Yep.
And then coming across the top, heading right, there's a cost element to it.
Yep.
And then there's a couple of different of these kind of variables that you mentioned
That's
that are
right.
going to change based on
Yes.
the options. And you're asking.
The options of management for those bioretention systems in Jack's street, mind you.
Yes, it's quite location specific.
It's very location
again,
specific.
it's like climatic data's quite
location
a
specific.
pertinent example here
Yeah.
because it's also location specific.
This is right. So for a
And-
catchment or what have you.
Yeah, and yes, okay. So I would then look at this, and I have the option to go, which of these three, including the status quo,
Yep.
I prefer.
That's
so
right.
I'd presumably look at them, weigh up the different preferences. So for someone who, like, okay, so I'm the resident and I live in the street,
Mhm.
and so I've seen this thing, but I don't really necessarily know a lot about it.
Yep.
Right, I might do. I might have decided, I might have poked around in it, but I might not. How do we make sure with the choice experiment that when this says option 1, water quality, very good,
Mhm.
that means the same to me as it does to someone? Like, is there a way, like, do we teach people a little bit about this at the beginning?
At the very
Okay.
start of the choice experiment, it's prefaced with a certain amount of information that's meant to orient or give some necessary context to the choices that the person is going to make, because ultimately we want them to make accurate representations of their preferences
Yep.
for these different options.
Okay.
So yeah, that information is presented.
Okay,
Yep.
so you go out, I get the first choice card, I go, my preference is, whatever, place that one down.
I
You're gonna
pass another one
keep
over.
giving me a few. We repeat through this. How many are there?
This
Like,
is
are there
right.
50?
No. There's usually about 6 to 8 of these different
Okay, so we're not going to irritate
questions.
people too much.
No, that's right. And then that's created through some fancy statistical procedures which limit the amount of choice sets that are created, which are these things right here.
Mhm.
Choice sets are represented on what these things are called choice cards, and these are choice sets. So we do, these types of things to ensure that people are not bombarded with a huge amount of information and choices, but through which meaningful information can be derived. And that information for this particular choice experiment would be how much people, or firstly what people prefer for the management of the systems, or the bioretention system or the rain garden or whatever, in terms of how much maintenance is being performed on it, and then from that, how likely it is that there will be flooding or ponding in it, or for example an overflow pit becoming blocked up, and also water qualities. We can work out what they prefer for water quality and if they are willing to pay for it. So those benefits can also be valued as well.
Mhm.
And that's the information, the meaningful information that can be derived from this, which in most instances in the way that choice experiments are applied is usually used to inform the way that decisions are made by environmental managers, or in this instance, a stormwater professional or practitioner.
Wicked. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that's an introduction to choice experiments.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should know about those, or?
No, well, Jack sort of touched on it before. This has applications to a much broader scale of water-sensitive urban design and stormwater management issues, including, for example, landscape design. So I don't know if you want to take it from there, or?
Yeah, look, I suppose I would just conclude on saying that we suspect that while we've both got a particular interest each that we talked about before, this does have the potential to have a really broad application and to answer any number of questions that you might have about the public's perceptions of things. You just designed the choice experiment specifically to suit that preference. We just happen to have our own two that we are most interested in,
including, for
present
example,
time.
amenity objectives, or just amenity generally.
Broader WUSD objectives to try and drive broader WUSD outcomes.
This is right.
Okay, sweet.
Okay.
That's it. That is a quick introduction to choice experiments. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Or if you're watching this really, really, really live when it first came out, then maybe if you're coming to the Stormwater 2016 conference, consider coming along to our presentations. Cool.
See you there.
See ya. Okay.
Well, I'm not wearing these pants to the movies. Or maybe I will. What do you think, Jack?
Oh, it's just fine. But before we go, and after that gratuitous shot
Oh
of Ben's
wow,
ass,
yeah, that was great.
we have to show you the setup that we used to actually film this video.
Because there's a little bit involved.
Yeah, so South Pine River at Sanford, we
right.
wanted a nice place to set up. So one tripod sitting kind of in the creek, GoPro attached to a stick. There, Lamandras tucked underneath roots.
In an environmentally sympathetic way.
In an environmentally sympathetic way. Clapperboard for syncing all these cameras. And my personal favourite, which is iPhone duct taped to tree branch.
We
You
do
like it,
what
Ben?
we can.
We do what we can. See yous.
See ya.